Our study for today is based on Nehemiah chapter 4, verse 10. Meanwhile, the people in Judah said, "The strength of the laborers is giving out, and there is so much rubble that we cannot rebuild the wall." We cannot rebuild the wall. This is the time to be careful, because the devil can hurt you most severely from the inside. He couldn't do it from the outside. Now he's using his greatest, his chief weapon against God's people. The name of the weapon, discouragement. 11 and 12. Also our enemies said, before they know it or see us, we will be right there among them and kill them and put an end to the work. Then the Jews who lived near them came and told us 10 times over, wherever you turn, they will attack us. The enemy took advantage of the Jews' discouragement and they planned a surprise attack. You know, friends, where you are stumbling, that's the exact place where the enemy will take control. They will take advantage of that. We are going to take them when they are not looking at us. That's what the enemy said. What will be Nehemiah's strategy against this surprise attack? Remember, we said the way we approach a problem could be as important sometimes as the problem itself. Verse 13, therefore I stationed some of the people behind the lowest points of the wall at the exposed places, posting them by families with their swords, spears, and bows. Nehemiah, in verse 13, put every man in the position where he could defend his own family. You know, blood is thicker than water. If one person in the family is injured, the father will not keep quiet, and therefore, instead of posting soldiers, he posts families as units at the lowest points, at the exposed places in the wall, which made him very, very cautious. He was comfortable when he was building. Another way of looking at it, friends, was with his family at home some distance away from him. A builder did not know whether or not they were safe. So Nehemiah put them with their families and armed them very well. Verse 14, after I looked things over, I stood up and said to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people, don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord. Don't be afraid. Remember the Lord, who is a great and awesome God. And fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes. The war cry was, remember the Lord. It was their motto, their rallying cry. Napoleon always reminded his soldiers of some past victory to stir them up to fight. Paul the Apostle wrote his swan song to a young person named Timothy. He gave him a rallying cry. The correct translation of 2 Timothy 2:8 is, remember Jesus Christ. That, my friend, is the rallying cry of every believer today. Remember the Lord was the rallying cry of the Jews in Nehemiah's day. Now verse 15. When our enemies heard that we were aware of their plot, and that God had frustrated it, we all returned to the wall, each to his own work. The Jews now could go back to work. The enemy was tired and they had retired. They found they could not surprise the Jews anymore. Nehemiah was a brilliant young man. He still has more strategy. Really amazing. I wish there were more Nehemiahs today. Verse 16 and 17. From that day on, half of my men did the work. The other half were equipped with spears, with shields, bows, and armor. officers posted themselves behind all the people of Judah who were building the wall. Those who carried materials did their work with one hand and held a weapon in the other hand. Can you picture this? Work in one hand, weapon in the other, officers posted behind them, half the men doing the work, the other half watching over this half who does the work. Each builder had a trowel in one hand with which to build, and in the other hand he carried a weapon, a sword, to defend himself. These two weapons or instruments should be in the hands of every true believer even today. A trowel, a working instrument, represents the fact that believers should build themselves in the most holy faith. That is for the inside. Also, we need to hold the sword of the Spirit. That is also important. We need the trowel and we need the sword. The sword of the Spirit is the Word of God, with which we defend ourselves. The trowel in one hand, the sword in the other. Spurgeon put out a magazine years ago, The Sword and the Trowel. I think it is still in existence. Verses 18, 19 and 20 now. And each of the builders wore his sword at his side as he worked. But the man who sounded the trumpet stayed with me. Then I said to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the peoples, the work is extensive, spread out, and we are widely separated from each other along the wall. Wherever you hear the sound of the trumpet, join us there. Our God will fight for us. In other words, Nehemiah said, I will watch, you will hear the trumpet. Come to that spot, and we will meet the enemy head on. Verse 21. So we continued to work, with half the men holding spears, from the first light of dawn till the stars came out the day. In other words, they worked from the rising of the sun till the going down of the same, until the stars appeared in the sky. Believe me, they were tired and weary in the work of the Lord. Verse 22. At that time I also said to the people, have every man and his helper stay inside Jerusalem at night, so they can serve us as guards by night, workmen by day. No rest. Night awake as guards, day awake as workmen. To men who had come from far away places like Jericho, Nehemiah said, stay close by, because we want you to be ready to guard at night. Now verse 23. Neither I nor my brothers nor my men nor the guards with me took off our clothes. Each had his weapon, even when he went for water. These were trying times. Real difficulty would soon come. It's going to arise, which will cause Nehemiah to become very angry, and which almost disrupted the work of the Lord as we move to chapter 5. While engaged, friends, in this important project of rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem, Nehemiah had been met by opposition in many forms. The devil is subtle. First, the enemy laughed at the Jews. Then the enemy ridiculed the Jews. Finally, you notice there is open opposition. It was so intense that Nehemiah had his builders put a trowel in one hand and a sword in the other hand while they worked on the wall. Nehemiah and his associates worked so hard that they did not take their clothes off except maybe to bathe. Now we see opposition coming from within. This is where the devil strikes his greatest blow. In the history of God's movement on earth, we have seen that when the devil could not destroy God's move by persecution, the next thing he did was to join it and disrupt it from within. The devil had already caused discouragement among the Jews, and now he goes one step further and causes conflicts among them. Now verse 1. Now the men and their wives raised a great outcry. Can you imagine? Everyone working so peacefully, and all of a sudden, there is not just an outcry, but a great outcry against the Jewish brothers. Verse 2. Some were saying, "We and our sons and daughters are numerous. In order for us to eat and to stay alive, we must get grain." First complaint. Others were saying, "We are mortgaging our fields, our vineyards, and our homes to get grain during the famine." The second complaint, and now the third. Still others were saying, "We have had to borrow money to pay the king's taxes on our fields and vineyards." Human nature, friends, does not really change. Even though we are living today in an electronic, mechanical, technological, and space age, problems are about the same as those during Nehemiah's day. I think that all of our technical devices merely multiply our problems and make them actually very thorny and difficult to solve. Because the Jews were so busy building the walls, they did not have the opportunity to carry on their own personal business. They had to buy corn, food for their families, and doing so they had to mortgage their property. Some of them had to mortgage their property in order to even pay taxes. Taxes were high in that day. They were borrowing money from their own brothers, their own countrymen. Verse 5. Although we are of the same flesh and blood as our countrymen, and though our sons are as good as theirs, yet we have to subject our sons and daughters to slavery. Some of our daughters have already been enslaved. We are powerless because our fields and our vineyards belong to others. For a long time this problem had been growing, but up to this time, Nehemiah did not know about it. These people wanted to build the walls of Jerusalem, so they very quietly mortgaged their property to their brothers, their countrymen. There were those who were in the lending business, you see. The foes, the enemies outside, had not been able to harm them, as long as there was love and harmony and unity, as we saw, within them. But now, the beginning of conflict. This problem had also come into the history of God's movement. You remember, Ananias, Sapphira had conspired to deceive their brothers. They were judged by God with sudden death. Their conspiracy had to do with money, finances. I do not know why money is such a temptation, but it is. Up to this point, Nehemiah kept his cool. He was able to go right along with his people and be patient with them. But now, Nehemiah is angry. He says in verse 6, "When I heard their outcry and these charges, I was not just angry, I was very angry." It is not just little anger, it is much. He was very angry. Verse 7, "I pondered them in my mind, and then accused the nobles and the officials." Notice he's quite straight. "I told them, you are exacting usury from your own countrymen. So I called together a large meeting to deal with them." The first general body meeting. A large meeting of the children of Israel to find out how to deal with the nobles and the officials who were exacting usury and taxes from their own countrymen. But interesting, friends, I pondered them in my mind. Vital, friends, one of the sins we so easily fall into which entraps us is the sin of anger. When people don't keep our pace, we fly off the lid and get angry. Whenever you get angry, ponder. Be quiet. Someone has said it's a good lesson to count 10 before you reply. But not just count 10, also think of times where you've goofed up, where you've messed up and made others angry. If you haven't made others angry, then probably you have a right to be angry. Nehemiah, when he was very angry, he pondered. And after he pondered, then he says, I consulted myself. I thought to myself. This is something for him to decide personally. So he thinks thoroughly to this very tricky matter. Never judge a book by its cover. Nehemiah exposed the nobles and the officials. Externally noble, internally abusive and exacting. Even as I conclude today, friends, let me tell you, we must be fearless when God's name is at stake. In our limited understanding, in our limited wisdom, we really cannot, because sometimes we can get deceived by the external. But friends, only the grace of God, only the wisdom of God will enable us to do this. God says in His word in James, remember, if anyone lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, and He will give it abundantly, liberally. He will lavish us with His wisdom, especially at times of conflict, times when we are left with a choice, when we can't please both parties. Ponder and then ask God for His wisdom, His grace, and then you will be able to take the right decision after pondering and looking beneath the surface, whether the man is pumping the water or the water is pumping the man. God bless you, friends.